Neal Mohan is the VP for display advertising at Google. About a year and a half to 2 years ago, when Eric Schmidt was still the CEO and he was at an analyst meeting and he was getting a bit beaten up by the analysts for Google's lack of growth. You know, they just were only growing by 40%. People are saying, well, what's the next big thing that's going to grow past search? You got search, and it's growing, but it's not growing as fast as it used to. It's the law of big numbers. And he said, display. This is the guy whose job it is to make that happen. So please join me in welcoming Neal Mohan. Welcome. So then, you know, Eric, who sometimes gets in trouble for what comes out of his mouth, afterwards, after that investor meeting, he gave a speech at the IAB conference in February, where I was, and astonished us all by saying that he thought that the display advertising business, which has sort of been like, you know, a ball of yarn that's been batted around over the last day and a half here, as to whether or not it's an important big thing or it's on the decline, was going to be $200 billion with a B. And then when I was talking to you earlier to prepare for this, you told me that you actually wrote that speech.
I helped him write it.
You helped him write the speech. So how?
Great question. And actually, one of the questions that I often get is, you're the person who's responsible for display. Why does Google have, hundreds and hundreds of engineers around the world focused on display? And in a nutshell, it's because we believe that this industry can go from the $20–25 billion industry that it is today, and it is growing at a good clip. I think most folks have seen the 25% year-on-year growth numbers, but it's not about sort of that incremental growth. It's about how can we actually take the entire industry from what it is today to what I think its true potential is, which is something on the order of the $200 billion number. And if you think about the way that at least we define display advertising, you can start to see sort of the possibility, which is display for us essentially encompasses all formats and channels where kind of the advertising is associated with content. So video advertising, mobile advertising, of course graphical banners across the web, but whatever format fits the particular channel and the content is what we call display. And if you think about, the $170 billion TV market, the billions and billions of dollars that are still offline that may be direct response in nature but are perfectly suited to display, those are all dollars that eventually are going to get delivered digitally. With the convergence of things like television and the web, with the tremendous growth in smartphones and the advent of things like tablets, all of those formats are essentially going to become display formats. You might be watching them on a big screen like this or a television screen in your house, but really the means and the technology by which those ads are going to get delivered are essentially display advertising. And so that's the reason why we're investing so heavily in it. There's, of course, a lot of barriers to get from that 25 billion to 200, but we're big believers that in a few short years, that's the type of numbers we're going to be talking about, which I think bodes well for not just Google and its partners, but for the entire industry.
How much of that is just television branded ad dollars coming over and effectively working the same way, right? So I'm going to have my television ad, and now that television is an IP addressable market, I'm using my television branded dollars in a perhaps more data-driven way, but it's basically still a TV ad. And how much of that is new stuff that you're working on?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, at the end of the day, marketers have two objectives. One is sort of finding as precisely as possible the audience they're looking to get in front of, and then delivering the most relevant, useful, creative message to that audience. And so those objectives are not going to change. The means by which we achieve those objectives, I think, are going to change dramatically as we can take advantage of these new technologies. You mentioned data. I know you're a believer in it, but the fact that now you can actually leverage data in real time. Imagine being able to move decisions about putting media to work from 6 months, a month, or weeks in advance to the instant before that ad is actually delivered, which is by definition precisely when you know the most amount of information about how valuable that ad is, which audiences you should get in front of, even what creative you should deliver. Those are all things that even 6 months or 9 months ago were frankly impossible. And so technology is going to transform the way that media dollars are put to work, but I think the objectives are, of course, going to remain the same. And just to be clear, I think that the way that we get from 25 to 200 billion isn't just about bringing those TV dollars online, although that's a significant portion of it. The global advertising industry is a $600 billion industry. There's not many industries that are larger than that. And there's a substantial amount of dollars, whether it's in the local markets, performance dollars, things like circulars, for example, that perhaps could perform better distributed digitally than the way that they are today. And so our vision really encompasses not just the top of the funnel brand-oriented types of dollars, but whatever objectives marketers may have, because when those dollars start to come on digitally, it's the thing that I think is going to help translate these new business models that are emerging for publishers as they move to more digital distribution.
When we were talking earlier in the month, you mentioned that there was a $50 billion disequilibrium between the amount of time that audiences spend online and the amount of dollars that are being spent in the advertising ecosystem. In other words, by your estimation, there should be 50 billion more dollars spent online than there currently is.
Yes.
What's stopping that from happening?
So I think that's precisely where kind of the vision sort of starts to come into contact with reality. So hopefully I was able to convey why we think that the potential of this industry is that $200 billion plus number. The challenge is that we're not there today. And as John mentioned, I think today, if we were to just address the challenges that exist in the market today, there's a $50 billion gap in the sense that the market today should have been something like a $75 billion market, let alone what's going to happen with all these technologies going forward. And I would argue that the biggest fundamental reason for that is that digital media, as we all know, is orders and orders of magnitude more fragmented than the TV and even print worlds that many of us have come from. What I mean by that is, there's been more web content created over the course of the last few days than existed on the entire web in 2003. Millions of websites are getting created every single week. And you multiply that with new smartphones, tablets, and other distribution channels, and the amount of technology and kind of media fragmentation that we as marketers and agencies and publishers have to deal with is immense. So it's no longer about buying a 30-second spot at 8 p.m. on the 3 major networks and getting 80% of all Americans. This fragmentation challenge is a real one, and the friction and the inefficiencies and therefore the deterioration of ROI that stems from that fragmentation is, I would argue, the single biggest reason why the industry's growing nicely, but is not at the $75 or $200 billion number today. And that's what we're looking to
The
address.
attention is there, but the access to that attention is not there.
Right, because I mean, one stat that I often kind of go back to is, we think of television as this kind of old world way of doing things where you negotiate these deals up front, and who knows how much of those dollars are being used effectively or not. Well, if you take $1 of media starting with an advertiser, in the digital world, about 28 cents of that gets eaten up in the friction that stems from this fragmentation, IOs back and forth between advertisers and publishers. That equivalent number for TV is 2%. So right then and there, without talking about targeting or new types of measurement or innovative creative, just the amount of kind of workflow back and forth inefficiency that exists is 14x the largest media channel that's out there. And so addressing that needs to be a fundamental component of any technology provider strategy and any marketer or publisher strategy. And if we don't focus on that, in addition to all the other cool things you can do with technology, then I'd say we're kidding ourselves.
So the thing that works with television, besides the fact that you've got a 2-cent cost per dollar of transactions, so to speak, or 2%, as opposed to 28, is that it's people, right? And it's people who go out to dinner together, and maybe they even golf. In 2 weeks, they go to con and
Right.
go to parties, and agree on stuff, shake hands, and look each other in the eye and say, well, you know, if that show that I just committed, you know, $25 million to over its flight of 20 episodes, if it sucks, you're gonna make good to me, right? I mean, we're pals, right? Mm-hmm. That part of the industry is hard to put into an algorithm. How do you address that when it comes to, you know, what is traditionally at Google a very algorithmically driven company?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and you know, the way that I think about it is, you know, Google is a technology company. The way that we think we add value to this industry is by building the technology capabilities, the platform, if you will, for buying and selling digital media between advertisers and publishers. But really, the technology needs to serve the purpose of the people that are in the industry. So through technology, if we can actually make some of those conversations between the buyers and the media and the content producers more productive, where they can focus on things like creativity, or they can focus on things like, you know, what is this amazing custom sponsorship that we're going to be able to deliver, as opposed to figuring out, you know, how do I get this type of creative running on, you know, these thousands of websites, or how do I actually measure the efficacy by pooling together, you know, dozens and dozens of spreadsheets. If we can eliminate that through technology, then I would argue that the people that are in the industry, all of us, can actually focus on the things that got us excited about the industry in the first place. And so, you know, my view is that technology is not there to take the place of what we all do every single day in the industry. It's there to augment and eliminate a lot of those tasks that I think are frankly keeping us from doing the things that we all know add value, like creativity, like those conversations you talked about.
I'm going to have to go through a lot of things. We don't have a lot of time, but I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about. You are our Google representative, so I get to ask you stuff
Sure.
that may be unfair. When are you going to solve the social search problem? When will... We've talked about social a lot in the last day, and we have Facebook's Carolyn Everson coming later today. Facebook has 1 in 4 display ads on the web, or at least that's purportedly what they have. Does that concern you?
You know, the way I think about it is there's room for multiple players in this space. You know, a few years ago, you know, Google was a new entrant to this industry. Today, by many measures, you know, we're the leaders in the industry. But the real point is that, you know, if this industry is really going to get from that $25 billion number to the $200 billion number, then there's room for many participants to play. And, you know, we welcome innovation from whatever direction it's coming from, as long as it's serving the purpose of advertisers, agencies, publishers, and actually, most importantly, users and consumers on the internet.
But what's Google's social strategy?
Somehow I knew you were going to ask that question. You know, to be honest, there's not really one single strategy, and you know this, John. There's, you know, you talk to folks at Google, and you will see very clearly that Google is a believer that in a lot of the things that were talked about here, which is, you know, technology can serve the purpose of human connections, can figure out a way to, you know, bring people closer together. Eric has talked about how social is just the internet catching up with real life. You know, if you think about it, some of the most fundamental algorithms that went into Google search, PageRank, for example, were based on some fundamental notion of social signals, essentially how different people that wrote different documents link to other documents in some sense. YouTube is another example of where, you know, hopefully through the investment that we put into that platform, we've shown sort of our commitment to connecting people. One of the things that, you know, that I'm excited about is that we believe that the way to address this is to make it so that all of our products work the way that our users want them to work, in a more personalized fashion, in ways that are much more relevant to them. And I'm not just talking about advertising or ad platforms here. I mean all of our consumer-oriented products. What are the ways that we can make Gmail even more personalized, et cetera? What are the ways we can do that with docs and calendars and those types of things? And so that's kind of a general answer, but that hopefully gives a construct in terms of how we think about the problem.
Do you envision a day when a marketer can approach Google with your vast data resources and your ability to target, which is extraordinary now, but playing it forward, I'm sure can get to the place where Bill Wynn was talking about after you acquire his company. But can you see a day when a marketer can come to you, Neal, and say, I would like some Facebook with that? In other words, I want to buy on your network, but I would like to be able to use Facebook data to help inform the buy on the Google Display network.
You know, I think that's certainly a question you should ask Facebook. The way that we've designed our
But I'm asking you.
Well, I'll give you sort of our design philosophy, which is, and you can see this in some of the acquisitions we've made, as well as the way that we've designed our products, which is, you know, when Eric or Larry talk about open, they mean it. And our, you know, one of the pillars of even our display platform is one that is a very open platform. What network builds, after the growth of its network, a completely open ad exchange that allows other networks and DSPs and all those entities to plug in to the same inventory that our own network has access to? We live and die by that sort of open mantra. And our belief is that as long as our partners are adhering to our strict, you know, user privacy, you know, transparency notice control, we welcome not just other forms of buying, but also other forms of data, as well as other forms of media.
Right.
And that was the reason why we designed the exchange. It's one of the biggest reasons why the exchange has grown 4x in the last year, and it's the reason why we're, you know, taking it globally, kind of across the world this year. So the general answer to your question is we've designed our platforms to be open, and whatever tools and technology work for our buyers that sit on our exchange in this particular example, we want to facilitate those.
I'll have to ask Facebook that very question later in the day. And please, your questions, raise your hand so we can get them ready, because we are on a tight schedule. I want to make sure I get your questions in. Mobile advertising, one of the large acquisitions you made, you know, after sort of setting the table with DoubleClick and Terracent and others, was AdMob, and, you know, largest mobile advertising network, and it puts you in clearly in a position of not only being a big player or the biggest player in that space, but kind of up against Apple. So first part of the question, how's the integration and how's AdMob doing? And then the second question is, what's your view of Apple as a competitor? It's a company that's new to the selling advertising business.
Yeah. So the integration is going well. Some of you may have seen the milestone in the last couple of weeks where we hit kind of the 1-year anniversary of the acquisition. The integration is complex because it involves an integration of technology that spans our Google technology as well as our DoubleClick technology. There's touch points with YouTube as well as you know, the core AdMob technology which we acquired. So lots of complicated building blocks that are being assembled, but we feel very good about the progress there. I guess the main thing that I would say is that you know I always like to take it back to sort of what are our advertisers and our publishers asking for, and you know I talked about fragmentation earlier, and our advertisers are saying, you know, now with the growth of mobile and smartphones and tablets, don't give me yet another interface, another set of tools, another way of targeting and measuring. why can't you just, Google, why can't you just make this work in the platforms that I'm using, you know, DoubleClick, Invite Media, AdWords, et cetera. And so you should envision a lot of our integration kind of going in that direction to make it as seamless as possible for our advertisers.
Another channel in your relationship.
Yeah, and of course the formats are going to be a little bit different. Some of the targeting capabilities will be different. There's a lot of beautiful, rich creative that you can do in things like tablets, but the fundamental means by which you buy should be on that same platform. Just like you asked the question around social media, advertisers want to be able to buy all of their digital media from the same place and not have to go to multiple silos to be able to do that. And similarly on the publisher side, and you know this as a publisher, John, you don't want to maximize sort of local maxima, right? Like you want to be able to do things like bundle your mobile inventory with your desktop inventory and maybe have video inventory in both of those places. And so making the platforms work seamlessly so this technology can work in a way where our publishers and advertisers don't have to, learn yet another channel, if you will, is a big driver of the way that we're approaching the integration. And it's going well. We do something on the order of 2.7 billion impressions a day across all of our application inventory. We have 80,000 plus application publishers that use AdMob, and that number continues to grow.
Is it growing in the iOS space?
We're growing in both spaces. These are total numbers that I'm giving you. We don't break that out in terms of Android or iOS, but again, back to this notion.
They used to at AdMob.
We don't. We talk about it in a global number, but it actually goes back to a point that I made earlier, John, which is the way that we've designed AdMob and the way that the integration is going forward is, again, for it to be an open platform. We want it to work so that our agencies and advertisers don't have to do two different things when they're on different platforms, or 100 different things if we're talking about different devices. And so abstracting that complexity out for them is a big driver of how we think about AdMob's success.
Do we have questions out here for Neal? This is your chance over here to ask Google a question.
Hey there. John Ebert, adexchanger.com.
Hey, John.
And two questions for Neal. First question is in regards to Invite Media. It's the anniversary of that acquisition. And I wonder what you think the impact is and any surprises you see. And then the second question is, what is the impact of +1 going to be on display advertising?
Sure. So let me start with Invite Media. You're right, John. This is the anniversary week of that acquisition as well. Suffice to say, Invite Media has been one of the fastest growing acquisitions that Google has ever made. I've been in the display industry for many, many years, since back in the day when the first ad was served on Wired in the mid-90s, and I've never seen a technology ramp up faster than something like real-time bidding. We just did a survey and we found that 88% of our advertisers, from the biggest brand advertisers in the world to direct response advertisers, say they're going to do some form of real-time bidding this year. That number only continues to grow month on month. We've doubled the investment. One of the biggest sort of things that we haven't talked about before, but I'll say today, is we're going to go fully global with that platform as we rewrite it on Google technology. And we've doubled the number of customers. Volume's grown something like 175, 200%. So we're very happy with that growth, and it really speaks to what I talked about before, which is advertisers, again, have the same objective, finding the right audience. If we can help the biggest advertisers on the internet do that in a much, much more effective real-time fashion through tools like Invite, then that's going to be successful. On +1, so I think as many of you know, we announced the ability to +1 search results as well as +1 some search ads a few weeks ago, and at that time we mentioned that we were going to be rolling out +1 across the internet to our publishers. We did that a couple of days ago. We're very happy with the initial results of that. It's still too early to talk about specific numbers of publishers or domains or what have you, given that it's only been a few days, but the initial results look quite good. All I would say there, John, about +1 is that it's really, really early days. The vision, of course, is to incorporate things like +1 interactions and the annotations that can be driven from that in multiple places. Again, back to this notion of making all of our products in some form social. And so you should look for more there over the course of the next several months.
One last question.
I just wanted to know about a value proposition to broadcast, as I come from an ad agency, and a couple weeks ago we were here in New York at all these great theaters looking at upfronts, and it's about how do you create a value proposition to go from our upfront buying that really looks at a 9 to 12 month period to the best sweet spot, which is right before the ad is delivered, and how do you bring that to broadcast?
Yeah, so I think that a couple things are going to happen. One is that I think that you know, as television distribution and digital distribution continue to merge, you know, John mentioned addressable TV, as those things continue to play out, then the advertising there is going to, just by definition, be able to take advantage of a lot of these new technologies in terms of, you know, real-time buying and the way that you measure it, et cetera. Having said that, though, and you mentioned, you know, upfronts, there's still a lot of room for improvement in terms of being able to do true sort of cross-channel measurement between broadcast and digital, for example, so that, you know, buyers that are buying across both those channels can do things like compare apples to apples. So, you know, for example, how much incremental GRP did I get at X price by doing both display and broadcast, and those types of things. So, you know, one is about sort of the futuristic technology that we should be able to adapt as TV and web converge, but the other is just being able to kind of make sure that both those channels kind of speak the same language as we're kind of bridging the gap. So from our perspective, from Google's perspective, we're working on both of those. But I think that's going to be, those types of kind of cross-channel measurement capabilities are going to be needle movers for the industry.
I wish we had more time for more questions, but we're running over. So thank you very much for coming
Thank you very
and
much.
representing Google for us, Neal.
Thanks, John.
Neal Mohan. Thank you very much.